Hello, everyone. Nytmare here, and this is Whale FM's Fireside Chat with Artists. In this show, we talk with everything and anything art and crypto in the NFT scene with designers and creators alike, otherwise known as non-fungible tokens. My guest today is Jeff Davis, a generative artist from the United States that creates abstract work from algorithmic processes. His work explores geometric structure and color arrangement through computation and iteration. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with the whale community today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
First of all, amazing stuff. I was taking a look at it and really, quite honestly, trying to wrap my head around it because I'm not that familiar with the space. Could you just give the audience an idea of the type of art that you create and what exactly it entails?
Yeah, so my current practice is around what's described as generative art. So it's I guess it doesn't have to be, but mine is code-based art, where you create a system to create visual output, and then you run the system and let it make some of the decisions either through randomization or data feeds or that sort of thing to determine the output that you're seeing. So you sort of you sort of set parameters around what you'd like the system to create, but then you hand over some control to either randomization or other data to create the end result. So I guess maybe that's in a small nutshell, probably I guess how I approach my artwork.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the nutshell version because it's it's a lot to wrap your head around. I see an example that you have up here. Now, this is an example of one of such works.
Yeah. So this was from last year. This is just my website's still needs some updating for the end of last year. But so this series was actually my first, I'd say, I had been doing a little bit of crypto work prior to this series. But this series, Abstract Tokens, was my first decision to really push into the space and do something that was completely dedicated just for NFTs. So, but this is my homepage. That's why we're sitting here.
Very cool. Before we get to that and your journey into NFTs and the crypto art space, can you walk us through your journey on how you came to this amalgamation of art and technology?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, maybe I'll go all the way back, how I even just started with art. It might be a better place, and then kind of how I ended up where I am today. So I didn't start making art until I was in college. And when I went to a small liberal arts school, and one of the kind of core requirements was to take a humanities type course. I went to school to study math. And so I took an intro to studio art course to fulfill that requirement for my liberal arts degree. And I really enjoyed it. And so then I took another class, and then eventually, after a few classes, I was figuring out how to add a studio art major on top of my math major. And so back then, at the time, I was doing a lot of geometric, work, but I was doing it through painting and traditional printmaking. And so this is some of what I have up right now. I guess some of this is, these bottom ones down here are kind of some of my undergraduate work, paintings and prints that I did. And then when I graduated, I felt like I was just getting started with my art journey. So I ended up going straight to grad school for studio art. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago to their painting and drawing program. And then that's some of the stuff. I guess this is still all, yeah. So now up towards the top here, this is more stuff I did in grad school. So I did a lot of painting there and silk screening, printmaking. And so really my approach, what I was doing at the time is these are all semi-representational works. They're just kind of reductive abstractions of architecture, or landscapes. And so I would go out and I would see things that interested me geometrically, and I'd sort of boil them down to their kind of simplest, forms and colors. And then I was, I operated, I guess, in the traditional art world for, boy, I'd have to do the math on that. 20 something years before, I got into crypto. And so I kept painting after grad school. I was trying to establish myself as an artist, in galleries in Chicago. And then eventually, this is where it changes. I had always used digital techniques to work out ideas for my paintings and for my silk screens. It was kind of like more of a digital sketch pad. So I would do things in Photoshop or Illustrator to work out ideas, and then I would turn them into paintings. And I never actually went straight from digital to something else. The print quality wasn't quite, up to the standards I wanted in the late 90s at that point. And so eventually it caught up, and I found ways to do printmaking to the level of quality that I liked. And so around this time, 2000 or so, I shifted from painting to digital printmaking. And so the things I was sketching digitally, I was just producing straight as prints. So the same sorts of concepts, looking at architecture, simplifying it, reducing it, bringing in color theory concepts into those compositions. And so that's some of what we're seeing here. And for me, I was never ever quite happy with the results I got from painting and printmaking. It's kind of the lack of precision. I couldn't get colors perfectly flat or edges perfectly straight, and that always bothered me. And so that was sort of a big improvement for me, I felt, when I went digitally. Although at that time it was hard to find places that wanted to show this kind of work. People still called these things paintings. Oh, I really like your painting, and it's a large format digital print. But so that was tricky to try to navigate that, doing this, but still trying to operate sort of in a traditional art world. So I kept going digital for, with this same sort of practice for several years. Some different samples here. And then you can see here on the left side, my portfolio ends at 2005 and then restarts at 2009. That's when I had children. And my priorities shifted for a while. I took a break from making art and spent time with the family. And then when kids got a little older, I found myself having a little more free time, more of an interest to get back to art. I was kind of stuck creatively. I sort of had felt like all of this sort of reductive abstraction that I had been working on sort of had run its course. And I was kind of running out of things that I wanted to do sort of in this. And that's when I turned to doing non-representational work via chance, I guess is the best way to put it. And so I guess that's just a little bit of representative stuff in here too, but these ones in particular, they were called rectangle studies. So all these are simply a certain number of rectangles positioned in a certain way on a grid, all based by chance. And so this was my first, I guess, steps into generative art. So I was giving myself, giving control over to a system and doing randomization inside of it. And I was doing these by, I was creating Excel spreadsheets to generate big randomized tables of data that would create the decisions for me. And then I would build these out manually. And so that was kind of my way of working for a couple of years. This is probably better, yeah. So, and you can see some of the precursors for something I'll talk about later, my color study series. But so these were all manually built from Excel data, essentially from random Excel data. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. So if you have things that you want to jump into questions along the way.
You know what? Normally, I love a good ramble, and on my own here, I'm interjecting, but I'm learning as well here because I don't know that much about generative art.
Yeah.
From a layman's perspective, and especially knowing that you had the math background going in, I feel like that the precision and then the anomalies are part of the beauty of it. Just looking at it with the naked eye, I can see some things that aesthetically look really cool, but then to know that came from, you setting specific parameters and this is what it built within, conceptually gives it more depth. So I'm just trying to absorb that and kind of understand that part of it.
Yeah, and that's when I shifted from, say, looking at something in the real world and representing it geometrically. There was, I had to make decisions along the way and sort of, refine it till it got to where I thought it was. And there might be different options to what the end product would look like, but it was a pretty linear, path to get from, concept to idea. And then this shift over to a more generative process was really revealing to me because you constantly surprise yourself. So you develop the system, like you said, but then you start running it and you don't know exactly what all the output's going to look like. And so as you're doing it, you get to constantly surprise yourself with your own with your own artwork, which is a really interesting way to produce artwork as an artist. Instead of knowing what you're going to do and do it, you set up a system and then you see what comes out of it, and it's fun. It's kind of the surprise or reverie that you get from running the system and see what comes out of it. And so these are still pieces that, like I said, I was sort of manually doing. And then at some point I decided this is kind of silly, all the work I'm doing to like manually build these just based on numbers. I was building these all out in Adobe Illustrator. And so eventually I discovered processing. And so that was a sea change for me. So what processing does is it just automates all this, and it allowed me to create the same sorts of randomization inputs, but it would also automatically draw the results for me, and I could just run it over and over and over again.
And processing is a programming language or an app?
Yes. So it's a programming language. It's similar to JavaScript, I believe. I'm not, again, as I mentioned, I'm coming at this from a fine art background, so I just taught myself some very basic stuff, and I'm much more of a hacker in processing than anything. So, but yeah, I think it's very similar to JavaScript, but it's built for visual output and I guess sound output, this basically creative output. So there essentially are commands in processing that are geared towards making visuals, doing design or audio work. So, and that's starts happening around here, 2012. So again, similar looking things, but these have now been programmed inside of processing and are running. And so then you can just run it endlessly. And so what I would do is I'd create the system, kind of refine the parameters until it was producing what I wanted. And then I'd run a whole bunch of output, do 100 of them, for a particular system. And then I would throw away the ones that I didn't think work as well, and then refine it down to a series of work from there. So these are, series of 20 or so.
And what would be, the criteria that you would use personally for what would be a choice result and an optimal output that you would say, hey, this is something that I wanted to be representative of my work?
Yeah, and so it's hard to say. I mean, I would just spend time with them. I would put up, just look at all 100 of them side by side and just decide this one has a strong composition and this one just looks completely off balance and just doesn't work for me. And so I didn't, at this point, I'll talk about this, I guess, a little bit later when I talk about art blocks. At this point, I didn't necessarily need to be careful when I was building the system that everything that came out of it needed to be presentation ready or final. I was curating the results of the system. And so, it was more open, and it would produce, weird outliers. Like if this system it's set to produce, pick a number of squares between some, or rectangles between some ranges, color them, choose between different gray values or black, and then choose where to position them on a grid. But it could be that it just created 3 or 4 rectangles that all sit on top of each other and are jammed in the corner or something. And so the output isn't visually interesting. And
Right.
so something like that, you would throw it out. And so then you would look for ones that look a little more balanced. So there was a lot of post curation. So it was like build the system to get it close, let it run, see what comes out, and then at the end, sort of post edit and pull out the better results, I guess. And so that was sort of my mode of operation. And then again, I was turning these into large digital prints and exhibiting these in different places. I live in the Phoenix area, so trying to exhibit these at different galleries around town.
Do you find that sometimes there could be a thematic run where you say, hey, it looks like it's there's a pattern here or something that you sequentially is a message or looks better as a collective, seeing the progression?
Yeah, I mean, I've always seen my work as, well, my generative work, I should say, I've always seen it as serial. So I always had a hard time either, if I was going to be in a group show, showing, only 1 or 2 works, or even I had a hard time if somebody wanted to buy one. I was like, of course I did, because I'm an artist and trying to support myself. But I always saw these as a package of things that all went together. Like if I had my way, I would have exhibited, say, all of these rectangle studies at the top, however many that is, 20. I would have had an exhibition of all 20 of them, and ideally I would have sold them as a package of 20 works together, because to me, it's more about the project and all of the output being together. Now, practically speaking, that doesn't work. So I was breaking off pieces for individual sales or individual group shows if I just had a piece or 2 in there. But so, yeah, I definitely see these as groupings that go together. So to me, the work of art is the entire series. Maybe that's a better way to put it than individual pieces. I try to make each individual piece interesting on its own, but in my mind, the work of art is actually the whole group.
Agreed.
So I'll keep walking through. So these are more series I did. So, and I think what this is starting to show is you see a lot of repeating sort of motifs. I was bouncing between these ideas of rectangle studies and then sort of these color palettes. But then they're sort of evolutionary. So keep making small adjustments to the core generator for these things. And then they just kind of, kept moving in different directions over time. Again,
it's interesting because, again, I'm coming from a different perspective, not really being that familiar with the format, but when you have similar shades, it almost gives it depth with some of the randomization, where some of these rectangles where it was gray versus a darker black, etc., it looked like there was a different field there or vision.
Yeah, definitely. And I was playing with that for sure, that there was layers. And the way like for instance, this algorithm is set up is that the blacks, and on top of what you're describing, the gray sits back because there's less contrast, but the black is physically has to be on top of the gray. So none of those gray rectangles can sit physically above the black ones. And so, yeah, you get this sort of two layer effect that there's
very cool
something on top of something else. So I'll just keep moving through my career here, I guess. So I have some install photos. So this is a series I did called Location Series. This was 2014. This is probably my biggest exhibition of digital prints. And for this series, I tried to do something totally different. So I went back to the work I had done prior to my generative work, the stuff I was showing, back in these areas, where I was looking at things in the real world and abstracting them, simplifying them. And so what I did for this show is I created an algorithm that basically made output that resembled what I was doing. So I basically tried to make a machine that was replicating Jeff Davis artwork from the past, but algorithmically. So it wasn't actually looking at anything in the real world. It was just creating abstractions that resembled my previous work.
So I have to ask before we move on, you know, comparatively, did you like your originals better, or did you think it did a better job?
I always like what I'm doing right now the best. So,
right.
So at the time, yeah, I liked this better. It was kind of a meta thing for myself personally. I don't know that idea, you know, I didn't necessarily communicate that idea, you know, in the course of promoting the show or talking to people about it. But for me, it was a really interesting idea to try to like essentially automate myself. But yeah, for me, I've always been, as an artist, when I do something and it's done, particularly when I was, you know, showing in galleries more, as soon as this stuff was up on the walls, it was over for me. I was done with it, moving on to my next project mentally. And I even had a hard time, like if I'd have a solo show like this, a lot of times, you know, people see it, then they want to show it in a group show somewhere else. And I always, after I put it up the first time, I was kind of like, I didn't ever really want to show it again. I just wanted to do something new, you know, for the next opportunity I had to show something. So, yeah, I'm always past the thing that's, you know, that's happening at the moment, you know, for the audience. I want to click through some of these photos.
I can definitely relate to that as a musician. Nothing bores me more than doing a show of old work.
Yeah.
And just that I always think that whatever I'm doing lately has the latest techniques or something I'm more proud of or more relevant.
Exactly.
But you know, you have to appease the audience and make sure you're doing the due diligence to make sure your stuff has some longevity and gets out there. But I think it's interesting, you know, you talked about the self-automation there, and I asked a comparative question, but I didn't even conceptualize like there's another level. So even though it was generative work that was being compared to your old stuff, it was generative with your input. So there's like a third level there. It's amazing when you think of kind of the different planes that this could be conceptualized on.
Yeah. So I mean, so it's like, yeah, I wrote a program. I looked at my old artwork. I wrote a program to try to create abstractions that resembled my own artwork. So these are essentially meant to be like, yeah, generic locations, buildings, doors, windows, you know. So yeah. All right, let me see it. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more. So again, just kind of continued through this practice, generative art turning into prints. Some of this stuff probably looks familiar to some people that might be aware of my current NFTs. This was a recent show I had called Facades. Actually, this is better. We can look at the actual exhibition. So this was a show I had like 2 years ago, big show of large scale prints called Facades. These are kind of semi generative. I would generate the window structure and the color progressions, but then they were manually sort of tweaked to give the rotation or the perspective, sort of the distortion that you're seeing. So these were kind of a mix between generative work, but then manual sort of adjustment after the fact. But then in 2019, and this isn't necessarily reflective, I guess, in my website, that's when I first started exploring crypto art, NFTs, whatever you'd like to call it. I think around that time, I think either Super Rare or Known Origin like started following me on Twitter, and I just caught my eye, and so I went and checked out their site. I was like, what is this crazy stuff? They're selling digital work directly. You know, these aren't prints or, you know, how does this work? And so, you know, I set up MetaMask and bought a little bit of ETH at the time. I think I spent $40 in ETH, enough for gas to try minting some things. And I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I didn't, nobody else I knew was doing it. I didn't know who to talk to about it. But so this is super rare. These are some of my first mints. And so what I was doing was, at first,
And you had no experience with crypto prior?
No. I really came at it from the NFT angle because I hadn't done like Bitcoin investing or anything like that. It was really about I somehow discovered. Oh, here we go. I somehow discovered like the super rare known origin sort of art NFT sites and was really interested in what was going on there. And so I learned about crypto as a means to go explore what was happening on those platforms. And so, yeah, all of my crypto learning has been, in conjunction with trying to figure out the art side, of crypto and NFTs. But so what I started doing was this is a series, it's called Construction Series. These were prints I had done in 2018. And so what I started doing is I would just take those algorithms and I basically do an extended run. I'd make a few more of them essentially. And those were what I was minting. So these aren't exist. That's why these numbers are so high, right? So I ended this series in the 200s. And so I made another small run of 10 of those maybe. I started at 300. And so I minted those. And so this was my first NFT that I ever minted. Construction 310. Had no idea what I was doing. And eventually, a couple of people collected a few of them. I don't know what this one sold for originally. 0.1 ETH for $23 at the time, whatever ETH's value was at the time. So, it's not like I was making any money doing this. I was just kind of getting in the space and playing around. Although he does have it for sale now. I think this is getting close to like $2 billion that he hasn't listened for. I don't know if it's worth that, but so that was where I got started into crypto. And then I mentioned this at the top of the call, let's see, so sorry, I scroll a lot. So these are all, like I was saying, these sort of extensions of my existing series. And I started doing a few at a time, selling a few of them here or there. And then now I was kind of just doing it. I wasn't doing it very regularly. I would just do a little bit here and there. It was kind of a side thing. I was still doing, working on projects outside of crypto and still exhibiting. So for instance, those first ones at the bottom here, these constructions, this was happening at the same time that I was, working on this series and this show. So they weren't exclusive. I was just kind of doing crypto as just sort of as a side thing that I was just checking out. Experimenting, exactly. And then, I just got more and more interested in what was going on. The value of Ethereum was increasing. So that was intriguing to me, like, oh, maybe there is a way to be, profitable or see this as a means to help support, my artistic career. And so here, when did I do this? This was, I guess, only 6 months ago. Man, crypto time moves fast. Seems like a long time ago.
It's years ago in this space.
Yeah, I know. So 6 months ago, I decided to just I'm going to just dive in and just really give it a shot and just focus an entire project on crypto. Get a little louder on Twitter, start trying to make connections, talk to people, promote myself, all that sort of stuff. And so that started with this series, Abstract Tokens. And so this was the first one that I did out of from that series. It was a series of, I think 60 related works. Let's see. Yeah, so all of these ones I'm scrolling through is a mixture of, I kind of made an amalgamation of some different previous algorithms that I had written. One that was color-based and did these sort of randomized color progressions, and then these rectangle studies that I was showing before. And so, but what I did is I made them more variable. So they kind of actually, it was almost like combining multiple series that I was doing before and allowing them to become output. So you'll see some of these are really lots of rectangles, at thinner widths versus these really chunky, minimal ones. And then the same thing with the color ones. There was ones that were very confined. So this one's barely breaking out of blue hues versus ones that, had more range or more steps in them. So, I created 6 of these, and I was putting them out about basically as much as the platforms would let me. I was doing like 4 a week on super rare, and I'd sort of match that with another 4 on rareable. So I ended up selling about half on super rare and half on rareable during the course of this run. So that took me, a couple of months, and I sold them all, over those couple of months. And so I realized, there's something here. And I pretty much, so since then, I've been 100% crypto with my artwork and my art endeavors. And then this was another series I did after that, a little smaller. I guess there were 40 abstract tokens, not 60. And then this was a series called Jazz Tokens. These were 25 works. These were meant to resemble jazz album covers. I'm a record collector, and so kind of some of your Blue Note or types of records, I made abstractions to sort of create feeling, those sorts of same with aesthetics.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I had a question, and I don't want to preempt you here because I know you wanted to talk about color theory and whatnot, but obviously a lot of thought process goes into the creative aspect of this and how you want the output to be. Yeah. Can you walk us through what's that creative process like for setting parameters to get these outputs?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. It comes from different places. So like to what I was just speaking about, this whole series is just based on literally jazz album covers that I have in my collection. I thought these are so nice. How can I create a generative system to replicate, what they look like, but again, in a way that is sort of reductive and more simplified, which is more my style and more my interest in what I like to look at, in terms of a work of art. But then some of them, like these series, they're very evolutionary. So I don't know where it necessarily came from, but at some point I just took the idea of what does it look like if you take 20 rectangles and randomly position them on a grid, and then creating that system and then using it and then going back to it and thinking about small adjustments to it and then making a series and doing it again. And so a lot of these are algorithms that have been sort of added to, refined, changed over time. And so there's an interesting, I guess, process of just sort of growth that happens inside the system. And so I don't quite know, I guess, exactly where. That's just maybe more of a bringing in an idea of play, I guess, into my art practice. So just taking the system and just poking it and playing with it and seeing what comes out until you see something that's new and interesting, and then running with it. So that's kind of like two different things. It's like, what is the initial idea for something, and it can be very concrete that I'm trying to replicate, or is it sort of a long running idea that I just sort of keep molding and shifting and playing with. And so the color ones, these ones are just about the idea of picking a couple colors and what does it look like if you step between those colors. You get all the intermediate steps and the effects that creates, and different ways to put those types of progressions together on the same canvas.
Yeah, I mean, tremendously iterative. I would think that, you could continue to refine that. I could envision, and I don't know the complexities of processing and, what that entails, but perhaps, a combination. Once you start seeing some things that are cool, there may be a way to, for example, combine the color algorithm with the rectangles in some form and make something totally new. So I can see how, for a pop culture equivalency here, you're making Jarvis from the Marvel movies, right? He's this AI integration of different things.
Yeah. And that actually came up, and I'm going to probably transition in here into art blocks, which is kind of the next phase of my story, but I'll show you something that you're talking about. Just kind of so those facades, I guess, that I was showing before were, I'd say, similar to like what you're talking about. It was kind of a combination of these ideas of rectangle structures plus those color palette progressions. But this series, so I'm just skipping ahead a little bit. I'll back up in just a second. But so this is a series I did called Viewed Card, and it was in conjunction with a async art project that I did. And so you can kind of see that here, I guess, where you've got this idea of I'll just make it big, a rectangular structure, but then you're seeing this sort of color progression, so this is something that's sort of fusing those different ideas that you were talking about from my other series, when I had been keeping them sort of separate, previously. And so this is something that's sort of bringing them together. But yeah, so let me talk art blocks. So that's kind of where I am now. So after the abstract token series, Snowfro, Eric, reached out to me. I think he must have seen some of my work in that series, either on Twitter or wherever. And he said, was like, hey, I really like your work. I'm working on this new project called Art Blocks. I think your work would be a really good fit for it. And he hadn't launched, the platform hadn't launched or anything yet. And so we kicked around some ideas for a couple of months. I took one of my kind of previous algorithms and sort of shaped it, made some modifications to it to fit what was happening at Art Blocks. And it was a really interesting fit for me, because as I was doing like these series on Super Rare, it was still a very similar process to my printmaking, where I'd create an algorithm, I'd run it, I'd create a bunch of output, and then I would select the ones that I wanted to mint, and then I would mint them over time. So most of the platforms, Rarible I guess doesn't, but Super Rare had a sort of an unwritten limit of 4 per week, and so I'd sort of dribble them out over time, and then I also had to mint each one myself, as part of that process as the series. And as I mentioned before, I think of these as all going together, not just individual pieces. And so I tried to get out as much as I could, as quickly as I could, to get the whole series, sort of revealed. And so moving to Art Blocks, it's a totally different process. And so when I had been doing those series, I actually had talked, before I even talked to Eric about this, I had talked to some other people, like, wouldn't it be great to have this idea of like a art vending machine? I use those words exactly. Like, what if I could put my script up on a platform and then have people just come to it and make art on demand based on the script, run it themselves, and mint it themselves? And so Eric came to me and basically said the exact same thing. Like, I'm building this platform, it's for generative art. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds like this idea I've been talking about, like art vending machine. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, I've said that to other people too, and they have no idea what I'm talking about. So it was kind of, we had this like, this connection right at the beginning, like, okay, yeah, we're both talking about the same thing here. And so the way Art Blocks works is, instead of me creating the series myself, you put the script up on chain. The script gets uploaded to the Ethereum blockchain. And when someone comes and buys a token at Art Blocks, what you're really doing is you are buying a randomized hash, and then that hash is what's powering your NFT that you receive. You're really just buying the hash. And so this was just a revelation for me. So we got this project together with Eric had one himself. He had Chromie Squiggle. That was his project. Oh, there we go.
So it utilizes the smart contract to run the script?
Yeah, well, kind of. So what happens is the artist uses a contract to you're essentially minting the script. The artist is. You're uploading it to Ethereum. And then the buyer, the collector, is minting a random hash. But the way the script is written, the script looks at that hash, and that's what determines the output. So instead of having like a random function inside the script, you write the script to look at the hash that's created for each user. And that's what's making all the decisions inside the script. And so me and Eric and Dan, the Genesis project, these were the three that we sort of like put together. And then on Black Friday of last year, Eric, actually it was like late Thanksgiving night. I was already asleep. He, texted me and was like, "Hey, I think we're going to go live tomorrow morning. It'd be fun. Let's do it for Black Friday, sale, whatever, Cyber Monday, sale weekend." And he hadn't done any marketing or any promotion for Art Blocks. And so I literally woke up on Black Friday, went to my computer, kind of did the last couple of bits you need to do before you can deploy. And we just went live. And then a couple of sales started coming in, a couple more, and I was just sitting here on my computer watching. I was like, "What's going on?" And we're chatting, in the background, and it just started accelerating. And then 2 hours later, it was sold out. 500 works of art in about 2 hours, which is by Art Block standards now, that's a lifetime. But at the time, it was like we had no idea what was going on, and so. To me, it was huge success, obviously, but just a testament to this idea of the platform that there was such a connection for the collector to be able to come in, not go shopping, but just say, I know what you're doing here and I want my own, and hitting the purchase button and having it be generated for you on the spot and creating sort of your own personal artwork. And so I think that's the magic of Art Blocks. And so pretty much since then, all of my thinking has been now geared towards what do I want to do on Art Blocks, because it just, it sort of fulfilled this idea of having the whole project exist in its entirety. I definitely had to tweak my thinking a little bit. I mentioned that before, that because of the nature of this, every single thing that comes out needs to be effective. And so you have to sort of keep refining your scripts until you feel like you're not getting weird outliers that don't work. So that was definitely a change. And so this is the construction token series, and just kind of goes and goes. All right, well, I'll pause there. Let me see if you have any questions.
I just think it's brilliant. I've seen this type of strategy deployed for some other NFT IPs and trying to mimic what would traditionally be a vending machine. But this is super cool on a couple levels. Number one, I know these are random generations, but that's the beauty of art, right? Someone could look at this and see the silhouette of a specific animal, shape, face, or whatever. But secondly, the way that you were able to gamify it and build in, scarcity, people, being able to get something truly unique. I think it was just a brilliant proposition. So super cool. And it also makes me, really have to try to think next level here. I'll ask you this question, with the augmentation of NFTs, with the new utilizations of the smart contracts, like what can you envision that putting possibilities out there for generative art and using those capabilities for AR and VR stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know about AR and VR. I'm very much a 2D person, like coming from painting, and I can barely, I definitely can't really make things move or 3D or that sort of thing. But pretty much for art blocks, at least, anything that can be rendered in browser is fair game for art blocks. And so there are definitely applications for being able to create generative scripts to, say, create 3D models that could be used in, cryptovoxels or whatever. So there's already plenty of projects that do animation and are interactive, that you can click and touch and move around 3D. So that's all part of the roadmap for sure for art blocks. In terms of smart contracts, that's a little trickier because every time you want to do something different with a contract, you have to deploy a new contract. But for my most recent project, color studies, I was able. There was a part of the contract that was interesting that every time someone purchased one of the color studies, I was able to have the contract automatically transfer my reward currency to them, abstract. And so every time someone bought a color study, they received 100 abstract with every purchase. And they didn't necessarily know it at the time. I kind of kept it a secret for for as long as I could until people started noticing it, in their Etherscan, transactions. But so that was kind of fun. So that was an interesting, thing. And I think the other thing that can happen on art blocks is in the reverse is projects can be set up to be purchased with any ERC20 token. And so you can set up projects that are not ETH based. So my next project, I think I'm going to be doing one that's based on my reward currency, abstract, so that there'll be an exclusive series of work for people that have abstract, that have collected my work in the past, essentially.
Very cool. And I don't know, because of where the script works, whether or not there's the capability to respond to external stimulus. Like there's NFTs that let's say the aesthetic changes depending on the temperature of where the user purchased, or the price of Ethereum or whatever, and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that stuff can be brought in. I think one of the things that at Art Blocks that that Eric's trying to do is he does want them to be deterministic. So that's not to mean that they can't change, but that they're defined at their point of purchase. And so if you have things that I guess change constantly, I don't know, there's possible. One thing what I'd say is like kind of a use case, like somewhat what you're describing, is there's a project on the calendar at Art Blocks for next, a week from today, I guess, 720 minutes. They're essentially generative clocks. And so there is an input of time coming into the NFT. And so it displays the current time in an abstract way. But it's pulling in that's a very simple, obviously, data feed that's coming in. But then the hash is creating the visual look, of the clock, and then otherwise it's pulling in the time from somewhere else.
Makes sense. Yeah, I didn't think of how much value is really gleaned from just being deterministic and truly unique in its attributes.
Yeah. And so this is I had not hoped. I did a little talk yesterday for WIP for the WIP meetup, and I had today's talk on the calendar. And when I was looking at these things, I was hoping to be able to promote. Not hoping. I mean, it's all good, but I was planning to promote my color study project, which was my most recent Art Blocks project, but it sold out last weekend. So I would still encourage everybody to go, look at them.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. On OpenSea. And I had structured this one I had wanted it to be sort of a longer form project. So this was a 2000 iteration project. and I wanted to sort of unroll more slowly and kind of reveal itself over a longer period of time. And it did for the first, week and a half or so. And then something, I don't know what happened. Something tipped over last weekend, and it just kind of, there was just a mad rush, and it just kind of all sold out overnight, Saturday into Sunday. Well, I mean, which is great. I'm not complaining. But so this project is my most recent one. And I actually have, this is where I thought, you were talking about processing and that sort of thing. I have the script up, I guess, for this project. And so we can I can kind of look at it real quick. And so this is what I have on screen now is essentially what's powering the color studies project. This is, it's modified slightly to work on blockchain, but this is essentially what has been uploaded to ArtBlocks and that is driving all of the color studies that were produced. So this is, and it's written in P5.js, which is a JavaScript version of processing, but looks very similar. So these are all this top stuff is this is running, basically creating fake hashes that would normally be happening, on the blockchain. But then declaring variables, setting up the canvas, and then these are all, see all these things, they say like hash pairs. What that means is go look at the randomized hash, the second section of it, and assign it to this variable. And so this is the red component of the RGB variable for the upper left-hand corner of a color study. And so that's what it's doing. It's going to the hash, it's finding that chunk of it, and it's assigning it to the red variable of the A parent color. So, just generally, I don't need to get into this too in depth, but so this is generally what the script looks like. And so,
curious, how long would you spend trying to create and refine a script for a project?
So this one, I probably worked on this one over the course of I'd say 3 weeks. But I was spending a lot of time on it. I was not sleeping very much while I was working on this one. Doing my normal day stuff during the day, and then I'd stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, working on this thing. Some of it came from other things that I built in the past. So there were some structural things that I was able to lean on when I built this, but a lot of it was. You talked about that idea of, I guess, gamification or for me, it's like adding sort of surprises into the mix. Features, I guess they're called on ArtBlocks. That was a lot of the work in this, is trying to figure out what those are, how to layer them in, how to layer them with one another, how frequent they should be in the overall mix. And so there was a whole lot of thinking that it's a really different way of thinking when you have to say there are going to be 2,000 of these things in existence when the project is done. How do I make sure that it's not repetitive? And when you start thinking about I want to have some very special ones, well, what are the odds of those things happening? But, over a 2,000, edition run that you only get, 5 of them or whatever, you have to put really small odds on it.
Right.
And so that was a lot of I hadn't thought through that as much on, say, construction tokens. That was more, I added a couple just because I thought it was interesting. I was much more strategic because I didn't quite understand how ArtBlocks worked, or obviously we didn't know what the response was going to be to the work. And so it was a lot flatter, and it was a lot more simpler relative. It was more in line with what I had been doing previously. And so once ArtBlocks has kind of taken off and seeing sort of the possibilities, there was a lot more strategic thinking on my end around that in terms of having more variants, how to layer them, and what the odds were. And so, I can actually run through a few of them. So, like a standard color study has everything. I'll just pull this one. the basic concept is it picks a color from the hash, puts one here, puts one here, puts one here, puts one here, one in each corner. And then it has the logic to blend those colors toward each other in all in each direction, towards each other corner. And then it's also based on a randomized grid. So this one is doing that across 15 rows 15 columns and 40 rows. So the math is based on those items, how many steps it needs to take to get from purple to this, kind of drab, olive brown color. So it had to do it in 15 steps. And then going this way from that brown to that orange, it had to do it in 40 steps. So a standard one is that logic with all the squares or rectangles touching each other. And then it layers on different color modifications. And so this is one. Yeah, so this has a saturated. So what this one does is it takes the four parent colors in the corners and it says, you know what? You hit a special saturated part of the hash. Let's make those as strong as possible. So it just takes those colors and it maximizes the saturation and then does all the same blending logic. And then there's the same thing with tinted. It would take the corner colors and say, take what the hash tells you the corner color should be, but add a certain percentage of white to each of those colors and then do the blending logic. And so there's different ones like that. Then there's logic that overlays the dividers. Are there lines? Are there horizontal lines? Are there vertical lines? Are there lines in both directions? And so there's different logic around whether that occurs and how often. Then there was a weird freak out that I put in there just called random. So it just overrides everything and just says, make every rectangle its own just randomized color. So sort of a glitch, purposeful glitch sort of.
I like it.
Yeah. And then let's see what other ones we got here. Oh, here's one. There's another sort of oddity that I built in. So it's called black corner. And so if this probability comes up, all it simply does is it picks one of the corners and it just makes it fully black. And so it creates, sort of a darker, more moody color study. And then there's circles. That was another surprise I put in. So if the if the rows and the columns are the same, so like this is 12 by 12, then that gave the possibility to turn all of the squares into circles instead. And so there was, of all the perfect grids that came out, about half of them probably turned into these circle variants just for a different look. And then I think those are the main ones. And then I put in a really big Easter egg, if I can find it. I feel like it was in here somewhere. There it is. Joseph Albers is like my art hero, color theory hero. And so what I did is in the script, I wrote a check. It looks at the hash. And if the hash contains the characters A1BE or A1B3, which looks like the first four letters of Albers, it scans essentially the whole hash. And if you have that segment in your hash, it overwrote everything and it created an algorithmic homage to the square, which Joseph Albers is famous for this series of work. And so I was nervous that this was such a small probability. When I ran a bunch of simulations prior to launching the project to try to figure out roughly how often certain things might occur. And this was one that was like on the border. It was probably going to be a handful of them, but a decent enough chance that it might not ever happen. But luckily enough, it did. It showed up, and I think there were 5 that were generated across the 2000
Very cool
series. Yeah. So yeah, so I don't know. That was success, and it was a good. That to me, that's the series, I guess, at this point I'm most proud of. It was so much fun for me to watch. There's a channel in the Art Blocks Discord that just shows every single mint as they're created. And so over the beginning part of this project, just watching all of these be made one at a time, I mean, it was so satisfying. It's literally was one of the high points of my career as an artist, just watching people make the color studies in real time, and seeing them, be generated and being surprised by every single one, that came out.
Yes, it's super intriguing on so many levels. And I think to know that the process behind it is so abstract to the way people would traditionally think of art. It takes a special, certainly with your math background and just the nature of how you work, takes a special skill set to be able to do it. It's like a musician that hears and sees things in structure as opposed to audibly, right? They can visualize the waves prior to making it and things of that nature. So between that and the user generative stuff, it's just it's super cool. I'm sad that I missed that project before it sold out personally. Yeah. So leads me to my next question. What's next on the agenda for you? What can the community look forward to, and what should we be looking for?
Yeah, so I mentioned my reward currency, abstract. That's going to be the next, from an art standpoint, that's going to be my next sort of endeavor. So I'm going to do another project, my next art project. I'm still working out the details of the sort of aesthetics, I guess, of it. But what I do know is that it's going to be solely sold for abstract. So I'm already doing that to some degree right now. At the end of every project, prior to color studies, when the series would sell out, I would airdrop abstracts to all the collectors of the project. And then at the same time, I would make new series of work that were available for sale for abstract. And so I set up this idea called the Abstract Store, which is an OpenSea store. And so for the construction tokens series, say on, so the construction token series on Art Blocks, I created sort of a companion series called Construction Rewards. And these were all sold for abstract. I think there's a few left for abstract. So like these ones. So this section in here, these are still all available for abstract, 4,000 abstract for each one. Most of the rest of the ones have been collected by other people that had acquired abstract. And so this is almost run out. So I need new rewards for abstract holders. And so that's going to be my next project. And then I'm going to couple that with a couple other initiatives sort of at the same time that I'm working through. I'm going to start building I guess whale holders probably know all about this, but I'm going to start building an art vault of abstract artwork to back the abstract currency. So I'm going to make some efforts to use abstract the opposite way, to go buy things with abstract and start building a vault of artwork to sort of support the value of abstract. And then after I launch the abstract specific art project, I want to give existing abstract holders first dibs on what's available for that project. But once, a week or so into that project, then I'll eventually be setting up liquidity on Uniswap for abstract and making it, a purchasable currency at that point. So that's kind of probably the next month or so, probably for me, in terms of it's going to be a blend of working on a new project and some of the mechanics around abstract, taking that to kind of the next level.
Oh, that's all just building a social token network in addition to all this, just a small workload there.
Yeah.
So people can't grab abstract on Uniswap now, right? It's only for people that are holders or active in your Discord.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't have my own Discord. So it's really the only way to get it at the moment is by purchasing my artwork. And actually I have nothing left for sale at the moment. So either you have it at this point or you don't. And like I said, so the next art project will be I guess one way people will be able to get it between now and then is when I start building the art vault for abstract, that would be another way. So selling NFTs to me for abstract now, having said that, I don't know there's much, I don't know that OpenSea accepts abstract very much beyond art blocks, NFTs. So that would, other collections or contracts would need to kind of add that as a currency. But so that would be another way, is selling back NFTs into the vault just to acquire it. But then, then the Uniswap purchase, that I want that to happen after the deployment of the next art project, because I want people that have been with me all the way up to this point and supporting my work, that have acquired abstract. I want them to have first crack at the next project before I sort of open it up, you know what I mean, to general people to buy abstract to then use it towards the project.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, Jeff, I could talk to you for hours about this because it's fascinating to me, but I don't want to keep you too long. I know we're running past the hour.
I know we're coming up on time. Yeah, sorry, I haven't looked at the clock in a while.
That's a good thing, right? That means we're enjoying ourselves. If you don't mind, I have some questions from the audience I'd like to get in.
Sure, you bet.
Make sure we talk to those. Some people had asked, when did the light bulb go off and you decide, what really made you decide that you were going to leave the math track that you were on and could switch over to art? And then also, what was your original career plan with the math major?
Yeah, well, great questions. So I've always liked math because it's just sort of it's problem solving, and my approach to art has always been sort of very similar. It's sort of almost like doing puzzles, to me, or something like that. So they were both kind of hitting the same notes for me in terms of, satisfying me, sort of intellectually. And I don't know, I guess in the end, the art just was more exciting to me than the math was. There was something more interesting. Like, math was more about being given problems and solving them. And the art was more to me about creating my own problems and then solving them. So there was more of a freedom there that I think appealed to me. But either one, whichever direction I went, my goal coming out of undergraduate school was, I loved college so much, I wanted to go back to college. And so my goal was to teach at the college level, no matter what, whether it was math. Even when I was studying math before art, that was kind of the goal. And so that's so when I went to grad school, for art immediately after, part of it was that I felt like I was just getting into art and needed to keep going. But the other part of it was more practical. I wanted my MFA so I could teach art at the college level. And I did. I taught up until just a couple of years ago. I taught art and design at the college level for 20 years. As that was my day job, and art was more something I did in addition to that up until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I'd seen some of your published books there for the Foundations of Design and Foundations of Color.
Yeah,
so I wondered if you taught as well.
Yeah. So that was all part and parcel of my career in education. Yeah, I wrote. I taught courses at the foundation level, first year level. So I taught courses in introduction to, design, color theory, basic drawing. I also taught some basic, intro to Photoshop, intro to Illustrator types of courses. But so through doing that, I ended up publishing a couple of textbooks, Foundations of Design, which is kind of geared towards first year composition courses, and then Foundations of Color, which is a color theory textbook. So that obviously you've probably can sense, my artistic aesthetics, sort of coming through in that similar way. Those are the things that interest me the most, sort of the basic,
right,
foundational elements of art and looking at things.
You can also see that you're fairly active in your local community, in the art scenes and Tempe, and you're an advocate for artists, trying to get people on board with scarcity and building a platform for them as well.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk to your philosophy and your efforts in that way?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of like new artists, like
Well, I mean, obviously, it's important to you both on the local scene outside of what you do in
Yeah.
the NFT space, and you have a much larger presence than just the projects people are seeing here.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, locally, I'm on a couple of art boards that promote the arts in Tempe. I obviously more art is better, I guess. So that's probably, if I had to summarize it, that's what it is. And I think my other, I guess I'll call it my day job, although crypto is quickly outpacing it. I also run a company called Dave's Editions, and what we do. This is what when I quit teaching a couple years ago. That's the reason why I started this company called Dave's Editions, and we publish contemporary. We publish limited edition prints by contemporary artists, and so I work with. I think we have like 80 or 90 artists on our roster now that are, painters and other practicing artists in sort of the traditional contemporary art world. That actually, many of them are quite well recognized in that sphere, and I work with them to create more affordable prints of their work, and so that kind of feeds into that too. Like I don't see art as it's not a zero-sum game. We want as much art out in the world as possible. And so Dave's Editions has been sort of part of that mission as well. Like get first-time collectors the ability to access some higher-end artwork, or design projects that don't have budgets to support buying expensive paintings. They can buy prints for their interior projects. And so that's been very satisfying, being able to work with such a large group of artists in that respect as well. That's actually, for that job, that's my favorite part of the day, is when I roll up the books at the end of the month, and I get to write checks to tons of artists for all their print sales for the month. It's the most satisfying part of that job.
Yeah, no, and people buy art just as much for the story of the artist behind it as they do for what's on the canvas or on the screen in this case. So always like to talk about the social and philanthropic efforts. I even saw, and I don't really want to have a discussion on this, but it definitely was thought provoking for me. I think on the Art Blocks Twitter, someone had retweeted a comment where someone kind of questioned, what is the racial representation in the NFT space. And it's something that I never really thought about before. So I just thought it was thought provoking and interesting that, your organization would be at the forefront of looking at stuff like that. So I thought it's just cool that you're as active as you are on a social level.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and it's for crypto, it's hard because there's so much anonymity. Like I don't, when I'm interacting with people, I generally don't know gender, race, it's hard to know. So it's hard to know what the representation is, quite a bit, right, to be frank, in crypto. I do know I'll just mention for Dave's Editions, at the outset, we started, I just made a rule that we're going to be for gender equality at a minimum. So we made sure that of all the artists that we were working with, 50% were going to be female. And then more recently, made specific efforts to have better racial representation on our roster. And so, yeah, I think it's really important. I think having diversity is important, and it should be an active choice being made by curators, platforms. We should be actively trying to create balance in that regard.
Definitely agree. Someone asked, and I guess driven by the scarcity of your stuff and then wanting to get more, and also just thinking it would be cool. Have you considered a spinoff of these weird outliers that you've referenced as a collection?
That's an interesting question. So I would say, part of it is now like moving towards working primarily with art blocks. There aren't really outliers anymore, or if they are, they're being produced as part of the run anyway. But part of what you're describing was when I first started way back when on Super Rare, that's some of this is kind of, some of these early ones maybe are kind of in that, like maybe these facades. These might have been ones that I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I made these specifically for this, or these could have been like extras, you know, for when I did that facade show, when I did this show. So, but I guess the tricky part is I'm not really working that way anymore. So now I'm much more focused on creating a script that's as airtight as I can and then deploying it, instead of creating a script to create individual things that I'm sorting through and deciding what to release. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, definitely. You mentioned earlier that work that had been 6 months ago, and it seems like forever. Obviously, it's been a journey for you. Other people are just coming into the space. Any advice for new artists, whether they're generative or traditional, looking to make a place for themselves in the NFT world?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like I mentioned, when I was kind of deciding, like, you know what, I'm going to jump in with both feet when I started the abstract token series. I think there's just a few parts of it. I mean, you need to put yourself in a position to be seen. No one's necessarily going to just discover you if you're just making art in a closet and not showing it to anybody. So you got to get it out there. The other, you need to be persistent. You're not going to get seen right away. You just got to keep at it, keep working, keep sharing. But then at the same time, don't be pushy, because I think that's also a turnoff. So you need to be sort of having those conversations, sharing your work, getting it out there, but at the same time, not like pressuring people with it or being in their face about it. At least, I don't know, maybe it depends on the nature of the artwork and what you're trying to achieve. But for me, it's about being sort of persistent without being pushy. So just keeping at it. Eventually the hope is someone's going to see it and it's going to resonate and it's going to get you to that next opportunity. And then that opportunity leads to the next one. And so for me, like I described it as getting loud on Twitter, I mean, but it was being more active on Twitter for sure. When I launched the Abstract Token Project and trying to connecting with people, talking with people, sharing my work a lot, and just trying to get out there and make those connections. And then it grows from there. I mean, it's a snowball effect. So once you build some connections, those lead to other connections. And once you have one opportunity, that will open the door for the next opportunity. And you gotta identify those and take them as they come.
Right. We've had some influential people on the collector side, and they even mentioned, once you're gotten some traction, you have to curate your collectors. So
yeah,
that's an important aspect of it as well.
I think that's an important part too, is that you can overdo it, too. So, if I was to put out not that I do this, but if I was to put out an Art Blocks project once a week, I mean, people would get sick of me and it would just devalue, my work. So you need to think about the bigger picture for sure too. Like what, I'm old enough, I've been doing art long enough, but you do have to think about sort of a broader legacy, of your art practice. So you do need to think beyond just like making a buck, on just what you're putting out, immediately. And I do think you should think about what in the end, what will my career look like, as an artist? And so it's harder to do, I think, maybe when you're younger and you just are kind of getting after it. But, kind of where I am now doing art for 25, 30 years, whatever it's been, you do need to consider kind of the larger picture.
Yeah, that's great perspective. And in that vein, if you could show us what would be one of your favorite candidates for NFTs that you own, that you've grabbed from the space?
You bet. I'll highlight a few people here. So I had it pulled up. How do I have this recently received? So I just grabbed this last night. Tutoroso. I really like these. He just did a series of, this is from a series called Lacuna. These are really nice. But I would say probably my favorite, if I had to pick one favorite, it's probably my Hideki. So before Hideki did, sorry, lots of art block stuff in here. Oh, yeah. Before Hideki did his Singularities project at Art Blocks, he had a series called Cells Interlinked that he was selling on his own through OpenSea, and became aware of them and just thought these were amazing. So I think I might have been his first NFT purchase.
Wow.
But so I love this so much. And I don't know, I wonder if I zoom in, if it, can't really zoom in on this, but when you see this in full detail and zoom in, there are circles inside of circles. Inside of circles, it like goes infinitely. It's almost like a fractal. But so this is, I would say, this is probably my favorite piece in my in my NFT collection.
Very cool. I'm gonna have to track that down and take a look at the fine detail.
Yeah.
And then the last one, because I've seen this a couple of times, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, if you've piqued people's interest and they're interested in getting into generative art and maybe exploring that a little bit, how would you recommend they go about that process?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it was learning processing. So, and I guess at this point, processing is kind of, sort of, I guess, I don't know if decade is the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but it's actually P5JS. And so, which is basically processing on JavaScript. Go here. Start looking at these commands and trying to understand what they do. I mean, and that's what I did. I mean, just start hacking and just seeing what comes out. I mean, you can't break anything. So this would be, if you want to get into generative or creative coding, I would start here, P5JS. And I'm sure there's, over here on the side, there's probably all sorts of different, like here's a learn tab, different tutorials you could go through. But for me, it's always been about, maybe I did one or two of these to get started to see what the sort of general wrapper for a program would look like. But then it's really just hitting this reference page and just looking at all the commands and just trying to say, oh, okay, this one does that and this one does this. And so how do I draw a rectangle? Here's how you draw a rectangle. So learning how to do that.
Very cool. Yeah, I know my experience with coding was I have to keep breaking stuff and learning how to fix it, and eventually I get it. So
yeah, and that's for me. Like, I came at this with no background at all. I wasn't like a programmer in some other fashion, and then learned how to make visual output. I was a painter, and I was working digitally. I guess at that point I was building things digitally in Photoshop and Illustrator. And so, yeah, I had to learn all this to figure out how it worked. But yeah, just dig in and hack at it. And that's the extent of my knowledge. I don't know much more beyond P5JS. I don't know how to do much else from a programming standpoint.
Right. Well, it seems like all great artists are scrappy like that. They find resources that they can get their hands on, and they just get really good at it, regardless of what it is. Yeah. Jeff, thank you so much for taking so much time with us today. I just realized I've kept you for about an hour and a half. So
it's my pleasure. I mean, this is a joy for me to be able to just share my work with people, share my process with people. So this has been, since coming into crypto, I've been very welcomed and I feel very blessed. So it's so much fun for me. I'm having a fantastic time these last 6 months, just kind of absorbing it all, eating it all up, and just it's so much fun. So thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we loved having you, and maybe down the road, if you'd like, and you have another project, you can come in and we could talk more about abstract and what you're doing with that as well.
You bet. Absolutely. That'd be great.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.